Welcome back. I'm Lynda Kinkade. Ukraine's president says he's ready for direct peace talks with Vladimir Putin. It would be the first time the two leaders have talked since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Volodymyr Zelensky originally wanted the Russian president to agree to an immediate 30-day ceasefire before starting talks, and he had the backing of European allies. But a social media post by U.S. President Donald Trump may have derailed that demand. Still, Zelensky says he's putting in a good faith effort towards peace.
We've repeatedly heard from our partners that they are ready to strengthen sanctions against Russia if Putin refuses a ceasefire. We will see. And in Ukraine, we have no problem negotiating. We are ready for any format.
CNN producer Sebastian Shukla joins us now from London. Good to see you, Seb. So just provide some context as to how we got here, with Putin suggesting direct talks between the two nations and Zelensky effectively saying, I'll see you Thursday.
A weekend of diplomatic horse trading, posturing and statements that have led us to this moment where effectively President Zelensky has thrown down the gauntlet to the Russian president and said, OK, I'm ready to meet you face to face. And that came on the back of a statement made by European leaders in Kyiv, backed by the US President Donald Trump, which said there must be an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, which needs to begin today. That obviously has not been agreed to by the Russian president. And late on Saturday night, in a very rare late-night address to journalists, the Russian president raised the stakes even further. He tried to call the bluff on Western partners and said, why don't we meet face-to-face instead? To which point, then President Trump came out with a tweet or a post on social media where he said, Ukraine should agree to this immediately, and at least they will be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible. And that breaks from the cover that the European allies around Zelensky have been trying to build up over this weekend of diplomatic negotiations to say no talks without a ceasefire first. That statement made by President Putin and now President Zelensky trying to call the bluff of President Putin, and now the US president saying you guys need to sit down and talk, is incredibly important. Take a listen to what President Zelensky said about holding those talks.
I will be in Turkey this Thursday on May 15th, and I expect Putin in Turkey, personally. And I hope that this time Putin will not look for reasons why he cannot do something. We are ready to talk to end the war.
Ready to talk to end the war is what President Zelensky described this meeting he would like to have with President Putin as. But what is difficult to understand here, Lynda, is that both sides have a different view on what these talks should be. President Zelensky says end the war. What President Putin is likely to want is to talk about Ukraine's sovereignty. That's far from an agreement on ending this almost now 4-year conflict. They will want to talk about Ukraine's ambition on joining NATO, military supplies and support coming from the West, and the sovereignty, the totality sovereignty of Ukraine that takes in the current line of occupation and those occupied lands in Ukraine, and the situation with regards to the annexation, that illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, Lynda.
Yeah, that of course happened in 2014. Seb Shukla, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us from London. We are going to stay on this story. I want to get some perspective from Kyiv. Ukrainian Member of Parliament SOVSUN joins me now. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Ukrainian President Zelensky says he's ready to meet directly with Vladimir Putin. The Russian president suggested direct talks between the two nations could happen this Thursday in Turkey. What's the perspective from Ukraine? Do people there actually think that Putin will turn up for these talks?
Well, frankly speaking, no. I would say that people are speculating about different suggestions he will make about why he didn't show up. But we'll see. If he does show up, then the next question will be what will be his conditions under which he would be willing to stop the war. But frankly speaking, as of right now, it's pretty unlikely that he will actually show up in Turkey. However, the recent postings by Donald Trump might suggest that he's not happy with Putin's behavior, and maybe this will push Putin to actually show up in Turkey. But that's yet to be decided, and I wouldn't say that we are very much optimistic about that.
Yeah. Do you believe that Vladimir Putin is offering direct talks as a way to shift the focus away from the demands for an unconditional ceasefire and the possibility of more sanctions?
Well, I do think that he wants direct talks, because then there is nobody to witness those talks. And then he will claim that it's Ukraine who wants to continue the war, and then that he offered some conditions that Ukraine just chose not to accept. So he's always been ready for direct talks. They have been saying those a couple of times, even over the last couple of months, including their foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, said that they are willing to have direct talks. But the big problem with that is in direct communication, there can be very little that can be done. There can be very little compromise that can be reached, because what Ukraine wants and what Russia wants are completely different things. And if Russia doesn't feel the presence of other Ukraine's partners, the Europeans, but also the Americans, then it will just continue to push forward their own agenda and not being ready to compromise on any of their demands.
In terms of further sanctions, Russia is already heavily sanctioned. What additional sanctions could be piled on Russia that would potentially make a difference, that would potentially put more pressure on Russia to compromise?
Well, there is still a significant portion of sanctions that can be used, but I think it's critically important to actually implement the sanctions that are already in place, because not all of those sanctions are actually working. So I think that is the number one issue, is making sure that the sanctions are actually implemented to a full extent. But in addition to that, there are multiple other sanctions that they are very much concerned about. There are basically no sanctions against Russian nuclear energy sector. They continue to build new nuclear power blocks all over the world without no sanctions against them. They still, most of the Russian elite can travel freely in the civilized world, and that is again something that they're very much concerned about. And what is critically important, their assets are still in the Western countries, and they're still safe, and they're still not being used to help Ukraine. And I think that is something that the Russians are very much concerned about. They want to make sure that their assets are safe, and that's the pressure point for the West.
Well, we will speak again soon. We'll see how this plays out this week. Ina, SOVSUN, appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us from Kiev.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching CNN. Stay with us.